Alrighty, welcome everyone. My name is Dev DeVrat. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Associate Dean of Admissions at Reed here in Portland, and excited to be with you all to talk a little bit more about the Environmental Studies program that we offer here at Reed. I'm going to pass it over to Joshua and Olivia to introduce themselves, and then I believe Josh has a overview of the program as well. So maybe Olivia, we'll have you go first.
Hi, I'm Olivia. I'm a environmental studies and political science senior. Um, yeah,
You want to talk very briefly about what you're thesising about and anything else?
yeah. Um, I just submitted my first draft of my thesis, and I'm looking at these four dams in southeastern Washington called the Lower Snake River Dams. And I did a public policy analysis of congressional hearings about what stakeholders were saying about the dams and whether or not they should come down. Um, yeah, and I am accepted to a PhD program in Pullman at Washington State University to continue this research in a sense and like how values and community beliefs translate into dams and water management and government strategies.
We're all very excited about Olivia's thesis and the next steps. That's pretty cool. My name's Josh Howe. I am currently the chair of the Environmental Studies program. I am in the Environmental Studies program and the History department. Um, you might have noticed that Olivia said that she is in environmental studies and political science. The environmental studies program is an interdisciplinary major. It's one of our standing interdisciplinary majors, and it is maybe the most truly interdisciplinary of our standing interdisciplinary majors. And it comprises five departments that contribute to the major and help make up the major itself. Those departments are history, political science, economics, chemistry, and biology. It's sort of our like, well, this is probably a reference lost on most of you, but it's like our Captain Planet of environmental studies, with our powers combined. Anyway, so the program is at its heart a science and policy program that leverages the gen ed requirements of the college to provide breadth in environmental material and the expertise of the individual departments to provide depth in a discipline within the environmental studies purview. History is in some ways an outlier that provides more of a humanistic approach to these environmental issues. So you really have an opportunity to get a math and natural science approach, a social science approach, and then a more humanistic or historical approach. We in history fit within a division called history and social sciences. So we're sort of bridging that gap. In addition to a whole bunch of core work in both the sciences and the history and social sciences, we have two marquee standalone courses in environmental studies. One of them is a methods class at the sophomore level. It's called Environmental Studies 200. It's where a lot of environmental studies majors get introduced to our super cool faculty. It's also where you get introduced to a bunch of different methods of environmental studies, and folks often figure out like which flavor of environmental studies they're going to be based on that class and some of the other intro classes. The second seminar is our marquee seminar. It's called ES 300. It's a junior seminar. Every junior has to take it, and it's a interdisciplinary project-based class where students get to work with a community partner to help them solve a real-world problem. And it is, we call it a non-disciplinary class because we're asking students to think like people out in the real world to help solve problems. And it's a totally crazy class. It's the most stressful thing I do at the college, but it's also the thing that across the board, our alumni write us back and say, this was my most valuable experience at Reed in terms of sort of what this work looks like out in the real world. That's kind of what the program looks like. Each individual flavor of environmental studies has slightly different requirements and also does slightly different things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, an environmental studies major has both the depth of whatever their departmental program is and the breadth in environmental scholarship to be able to either apply to graduate programs in environmental areas like Olivia has, or go directly into environmental nonprofits, government work, law school, we have really cool placements for environmental studies majors. They come out with lots of different skills that are immediately applicable. So, in addition, it's a pretty cool community of people because it's kind of a major plus. Everybody who's an environmental studies major is getting most of their departmental major plus the environmental side. You get a lot of really dedicated students who are really excited about the work that we're doing in the program, and that community is really fun as a faculty member to work with. And I think Olivia can probably talk about whether and when it's fun to work with as a student. But it's a pretty cool community of people. Environmental studies faculty, there are 5 of us. 4 of us were hired within the same like decade. We're all sort of mid-career scholars, really excited about the program, and we're hired specifically to do this. So we all get along pretty well, which is neat. The faculty, I'm one of them. I predominantly have studied the politics of climate change and the history of climate change. More recently, I have moved into thinking about toxic exposures as a result of American foreign policy and warfare. Chris Koski studies everything under the sun. He's a political scientist, but is particularly versed in American environmental policy, climate policy, food policy, and state and local politics. He also talks faster than any human that I've ever met in my life. Lynn Gratz is an environmental chemist who does atmospheric circulation and mercury deposition work, and she is really good at making the sort of basic science in those 2 realms clearly applicable in policy frameworks, and she tends to teach with Chris in the method class. Aaron Ramirez is an ecologist who specializes in translational ecology, which is essentially making ecology relevant to stakeholders, and studies mostly trees. And people line up for days to take his classes because you get to go climb trees and go on like a million field trips. He's probably got the most popular classes in the environmental studies program, and maybe the college, and also the best beard at the college, I think. And then Noel Nedesil is in environmental studies economics, and Noel helped found the program, teaches natural resource economics, and does, this is a word you'll learn when you're here, a bunch involving hedonic pricing, which is essentially a way to value the amenities in our lives that are provided by the environment. That's kind of an overview of like who we are and what we do. Olivia, maybe you can talk a little bit about what the student experience has been like in terms of the culture of the program and like some of the highs and lows of being an ES major.
Yeah. Oh, where to start? It's a little bit strange at first being an ES major because you're split into 2 departments. Like your freshman year, you don't really get to see a lot of the ES department because there aren't very many classes. Like you don't really start to really work in the environmental studies department until the end of your sophomore year. So it's a little bit weird, but then these seminars are super awesome. You get to learn so much. One of my favorite things about being an ES major rather than just a political science major is you get to work in all of these softwares that you otherwise wouldn't have a lot of experience with, specifically GIS, which people really like because it's a mapping software and it's super useful. It's also the ES department has a great community. Like you become really quick friends with everybody in your peers, people in the classes above and below you, and the professors are great. They're super interesting classes, and you can take environmentally focused classes not only in the 5 concentrations, but there are also a lot outside of those concentrations. So if you're interested in environmental literature and, that could fill some of your requirements and you can go and expand out. It's super fun. It's really great. The environmental junior seminar is awesome because you get real world experience working with a stakeholder. For my junior seminar, we worked with the Nehalem Bay Watershed Council, And we did a weekend trip out to Tillamook, Oregon on the coast in Nehalem Bay. And we saw all of these riparian areas, learned about salmon, learned about water management, got to meet all these guys that you would not meet in any other way, other than through this program. And it was an amazing bonding experience just with my peers because it was a fun experience. And you get to work on something real, like give real advice to a real organization and do real research that's gonna hopefully improve this organization for the better, you know. Um, yeah, it's it's a fun program. It's a fun department. I would definitely say that I feel more devoted to the environmental studies department than I do the political science department. But it's fun to be part of both.
And Olivia, I'm wondering if you can maybe talk to us a little bit more about, how did you decide that environmental studies was for you? At what point did you make that decision? And what support did you have to help you make that decision? As well as how did you decide which of the um, sort of concentrations, if you will, that was right for you?
Yeah. Um, I always knew that I wanted to do something environmentally focused. That's just where my interest lied, but I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do it natural science or social science. And even when I was leaning more towards social science, I was debating between history and political science. Uh, and I took a bunch of political science classes and was like, yeah, this is the thing for me. It just clicked for me. You have to take a lot of science classes. You have to take biology, chemistry, and then an upper level in one of the two of those. And I pretty quickly discovered that being in a lab for 5 hours was not for me, and that I would much rather read um, academic papers than be using pipettes. um, and then between the social sciences, it was really just, I thought to myself, do I want to be working on something? What do I want to be working on? And that led me to policy and public policy and environmental policy and dams. And through the environmental, the ES 300, the junior seminar, I really leaned towards salmon and dams. And I remember after taking that seminar, I emailed Josh because he teaches a history class, Water in the American West, which I'm in now, and asked for the syllabus and did a handful of readings over the summer. And that's really basically, it's a lot easier than you think it's going to be. And it's super easy to take a few classes in each of the disciplines, in each of the options. And it'll click.
Awesome. And then this is for kind of either or both of you, but what kind of research, or if you could give some examples of the different types of research that students have had the opportunity to work on in the ES department?
Yes, the ES program has a couple of different ways of supporting research. In classes itself, students tend to work on kind of two types of research. One, in the methods class, they will do sort of short-term preset research based on more long-term research programs that the faculty have in order to develop a familiarity with those methods. So it's not really like original research in the way that you might think, but the research skills that you develop enable you to work on other things in Environmental Studies 300, where you are doing original collaborative research for a stakeholder, but also on the thesis, and then outside of the regular academic program, students also bring those research skills to individual projects either with ES faculty over the summer or as part of the Environmental Studies Summer Experience, which is a research fund that we support for students to work on either research or internships or self-directed projects over the summer that wouldn't otherwise be funded. So, for example, there's a chemical that leaches out of tires that can be really bad for salmon. And Lynn Gratz is working with a student this summer to try to figure out the best ways to detect that chemical in the Portland area watersheds, particularly between here and the Willamette River, to try to figure out what kind of presence of this chemical, how to determine the presence of this chemical in order to, in the future, assess its impact on salmon. Chris Koski has done a bunch of research with a bunch of different students on a bunch of different things. But some of the coolest stuff that he's done is working collaboratively with students who are econ students, trying to map some of the underground streams throughout Portland and figure out like where those original stream beds were and where that water flows to get a better sense of what the watershed looks like. And that was in conjunction with Noel Nettlesel's project to trying to like price environmental amenities. I worked with students a number of years ago. One of them was a research assistant on this book that I just published about toxic exposures among military personnel. And that student did all kinds of things, mostly tracking down citations and trying to figure out, like, essentially do a meta-analysis of the types of journals that we were relying on to make sure that we were not sort of unintentionally biasing our research by basing our conclusions in certain types of journals and not others. But she also ended up providing really good feedback on the book itself. And I worked with another student to do kind of preliminary research in congressional hearings to try to figure out how people were talking about this particular island in the middle of the Rio Grande that was disputed space in the beginning of the 20th century. So the research that students do is kind of all over the map. There are a couple of different programs that we have to facilitate that research financially over the summertime. The SE is the main one, but there's a couple others within departments and then available to the ES program that allow for collaborations with professors. And students are always working with Erin, climbing trees and measuring forest health, and with another ecologist here, Sam Fay, trying to figure out like what's going on with the dynamics of the Reed Canyon. There are a ton of research opportunities that are adjacent to ES that we also help support.
And Josh, you talked about the canyon. Can you talk about a little bit more about, do the students in the program, just the faculty of the program, do work related to the canyon?
Yeah, so if you haven't been to Reed, it's a little bit striking. There's a 27-acre nature preserve in the middle of campus, and you actually have to cross one of a couple of bridges to get to a bunch of the dorms, or to get from the dorms to the buildings. That space is like a historically constructed space. It has been restored over the past 20 years in order to make it look like or function like old growth Northwest forest. We actually have an active salmon and steelhead population that spawns in there. And it is currently the only free-flowing stream in this part of the watershed that flows all the way to the Pacific Ocean. So it's super cool. Almost every flavor of ES has an opportunity to engage with the canyon in some capacity. I'll tell you that in my intro to U.S. environmental history, we use the canyon as our starting point for thinking about how to do the history of landscapes and use nature as a category of analysis in historical thinking. And students go into the canyon itself to figure out the space and how to look at the space historically. And they also go into the archive to find old images of the space and documents that record transitions of the space over time. And students have found amazing things that way. So like we found, for example, that in the teens, they dredged the whole thing and drained it because they had a big malaria scare, which is crazy when you see it now because you can't imagine it being drained. I also found like photos of like these giant tug of wars across the canyon in which like students would get hauled into the canyon and come up just like head to toe covered in mud as part of these like Canyon Day activities. And that's just in my class. I mean, there's a bunch of ecological research looking at, for example, the lamprey populations at the east end of the canyon. So there's a bunch going on, sort of monitoring invasive plants in the canyon. And then there's also, separate from our research, a whole like canyon restoration crew. So people are actually working and getting paid to maintain that space. And a lot of those tend to be ES majors, so it's not exclusive to ES majors.
Awesome. And then could you talk a little bit more about career paths of students that go on from ES in the different concentrations? Is that the proper term, concentrations?
The official term is concentrations, but we actually call them flavors.
Okay.
And I don't know why, when we started doing that or why, but like we refer to them as the flavors of environmental studies. That's internal. Like the administration refers to them as concentrations. Yeah. Um, so it really runs the gamut. And I will say that there's one of the great things about environmental studies is that breadth component in the seminars give you a base of skills that give you a lot of options when it comes to working in fields that are outside of your concentration, because you have uh, demonstrated mathematical reasoning, demonstrated spatial reasoning, and the tools to use it. Everybody has at least 4 semesters of science, and everybody at least has 3 semesters of social science. So students come out with a lot of different options. And what we find is that there are certainly some students who come out with an ES bio degree and go to graduate school in some form of biology or environmental studies and focus on biology, and that's normal, but that's actually not like the mode. The mode is that people come out and do something that's adjacent to their concentration. So we've had sort of ES history majors who come out and like work for the American Prairie Reserve, for example, helping to like broker negotiations between tribal members and the reserve to create more common space for free-ranging species on the Montana plains. And that's, there's a lot of biology involved in that. We've had a number of students who go to law school and find themselves, they come out with an ES history degree and they go to law school and they find the thing that's most valuable for them in law school is that they are scientifically literate in a way that enables them to engage in cases that nobody else in law school that they go to law school with is qualified to do. We've had ES econ students who come out and end up translating scientific literature into policy for the city of Portland and other government agencies, again, because they're literate in kind of like both sides of that conversation. And then we have like ES chemists who have gone on and like developed THC tests for marijuana to figure out like how much THC is in stuff, right around the time that marijuana was being legalized in Oregon. So they're kind of doing all kinds of things, and some of it's pretty straightforward. But really, what's neat about ES is that the skills that students develop are really translatable to a bunch of different fields. And that goes for both the graduate programs they're going to, but also the jobs they're going directly into.
And could you, I think you touched on this, but do you mind elaborating a little bit more about what the first 2 years in the program looks like? And then I'm going to kind of add to this question, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about the thesis process and what does that look like for the different flavors in the program?
Okay. Um, I'm going to give the sort of stock answer, and Olivia, I'm going to ask you if you want to sort of like complicate any of this. So the front end of the environmental studies program looks really intimidating, especially if you don't know which flavor that you want to be, because we have these core requirements. And on the math and natural sciences side, all the courses are sequential. So the smartest thing to do is to take chemistry and biology in your first year. And so for folks who are on the math and natural science side of ES or who aren't sure, our recommended path is that they take Humanities 110, Intro Bio, and Intro Chem. And that as a first year is not a lot of choice. And students really don't like that. And we have to make sure that everybody knows that like on the back end, you have a ton of choice later on in the program. And I think Olivia was referring to this where like it clicks later on as the pieces come together. But to get the prerequisites out of the way, usually that first year is pretty regimented. In the second year, you have a chance to dance a little bit. Typically, students will take an environmental studies, history, and social science course that is interesting to them to sort of try it out. And they'll take an upper level science course or a bio course. They'll also take something from outside of environmental studies. You have more classes to play with because the second year is 4 classes each semester. The first year, it's technically 3.5 each semester. Humanities 110 counts for 1.5 each semester. So there's a little bit more room in that sophomore year, and that's where people really find which flavor of environmental studies they're most interested in, and like whether it's the right program for them, but also like begin to see where they fit the school more broadly. And so the sophomore year is really where things start to loosen up a little bit. I will say that a lot of folks add a 4th class in the spring of their first year. We don't always recommend it, but folks who are like doing fine and want to often will add a class that's either one of the environmental studies courses that's like a regular ES course, like Intro to Environmental History or Politics and Public Policy, or Natural Resource Economics. Or they'll add Environmental Studies 200, which is the first of the 2 seminars in the spring of their first year. And that can help make some of these decisions earlier on. But the first year feels pretty regimented. The second year gets a little looser. And a lot of students do it a little bit differently, and end up taking chemistry their second year, or, there are ways to make it more flexible beyond those recommendations. What do you think, Olivia? How did I do?
I think you did good. I would say that I would like the first 2 years are regimented. You wanna, on paper, it looks like a lot of credits. And I will be completely honest, it looks like a lot of requirements to fill. So the most of those prerequisites that you can fill in the first year, year and a half, you want to do as soon as possible so that you have more freedom to explore your interests, or if you're interested in studying abroad, or if you want to take classes in the humanities rather than more in the social sciences as you get later into it. You have that freedom. My freshman year, I took chemistry, and then my sophomore year, I took biology so that I wasn't drowning in science the first year. And you can take bio first and chemistry second, or you can take them both at the same time. But my summer advisor was super helpful in that, and telling me it looks like a lot on paper. You want to get as organized and hit these like 101 classes as quickly as possible and just get them out of the way, so then you can decide what you want to do later on. And then when you get those out of the way, you can take some super fun, interesting classes.
I will say that the reality is, like, we have these general education requirements that we call group requirements, and the science requirements for environmental studies satisfy those gen ed requirements. So even if you decide to do something else, if you take those classes early, you've done yourself a favor down the road. So it's not totally like confined to environmental studies, that there's some advantage to doing this early.
And I'll also add, as someone that did not go to Reed for college, but instead went to a pretty large state school and switched my major 7 times in college, um, this is reflective of actually a lot of colleges and a lot of programs where your first year to 2 years, it feels more structured because you kind of have to get some of that foundational stuff out of the way before you can then explore those passions and interests. So it's worth the wait for sure, and especially here at Reed. I'm going to jump around with the questions here a little bit, but we talked about some of those requirements that are required of ES students, regardless of sort of the concentration or flavor. Can you talk about support systems for students that are in the program, and like resources that students have access to?
Yeah, so the BS program, it let's say this, every faculty member is also split between a home department and the ES program. So students don't necessarily have advisors that are part of the ES program right away. And we all know that. So environmental studies faculty hold events and open houses for first year students in the fall to try to make sure that we kind of gather everybody in the same place and get everyone on the same page. And we try to make ourselves especially available to first year students to get everybody started on the right foot. I've also started last year at the behest of the dean, running trainings for advisors who are advising environmental studies students who are not part of the ES program, so that we're doing a better job these days of making sure everybody kind of knows what's going on with ES. Beyond that, I mean, the college broadly has academic services in tutoring for math and science and writing. Professors have obligatory office hours. Most of us actually hold more office hours than we're obliged to because we understand that it's part of our job, particularly at a small liberal arts college where students come here because they want access to their faculty members. So there's a lot of support that way. And then, as Olivia said, we get a lot of really good peer-to-peer support, both formally and informally, from other students in the program, both through sort of peer mentoring programs that we have, not specific to environmental studies, but in the college more broadly, but also in the informal relationships that folks develop during the seminars and at our environmental studies events and in the core classes that everybody has to take. I think that last part is really important for environmental studies because I think we probably have one of the better informal mentoring relationships among our students across the college. A lot of environmental studies students on the back end report feeling sort of well taken care of and incorporated into a community. And that really helps us make sure that we don't kind of lose track of students and help kind of keep everyone on board. Is that what you're thinking about, those resources, Dev?
That was perfect. Yes, thank you so much. And so then when it comes to like the natural sciences, are most of the classes lab-based? Are there field-based classes that involve like wildlife or sort of going out into the field? Can you, either of you or both, kind of talk about what that experience is like?
Yeah, so it runs the gamut. In the environmental studies program, we've made a real point on making sure that the ES classes that we teach as core faculty we really strive to go outside and really strive to go into the field and make sure that folks are getting that experience. I mentioned Aaron Ramirez's classes. It's like from day one you go outside. My intro environmental history class, day one is all outside. So there's significant field components. But similarly, I mean, our environmental chemistry class is all about measuring stuff in the real world and figuring out how to do that. So there's, I think, fieldwork built into the program. I would say within the biology program, the biology department, you have the most opportunity to engage in both field and lab work that relates to environmental studies. Biology has these three clusters of classes, and most of the environmental studies biology courses fit into one of the clusters, which are these sort of field-based classes. But some also fit into the lab-based classes. And anybody who's an ES biology major also has to satisfy the clusters. What that means is that biology has created this whole cluster of classes that make field experiences available. And a lot of our students take advantage of those, which is pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know, Olivia, you've experienced this, so what do you think?
Um, in the seminars, the ES seminars, you definitely get time outside in both. A lot more time outside in the field in the JSEM. Well, I guess that might change depending on who your stakeholder is. But in my experience, we were coring trees, measuring forest density, ages of trees, etc., testing water and all these things and getting field experience, which as a social science major, I would never do in any of my other classes. So that's exciting. Um, I know some people that took some of the field classes, and like Josh was saying earlier, Aaron Ramirez's classes, one of them, you give up every weekend and students do it willingly, and there's always a long wait list, and you give up every weekend and you go camping and you climb trees and people love it. And so you're getting field work every weekend, pretty much. So there are a lot of options.
So that a student or a potential student was asking about data for our majors. I should note that the sample size for ES majors is pretty low. We have between like 15 and 20 majors a year, and we haven't always had that many. So when I'm giving this sort of like anecdotal reports about what students do, it's in large part because like there's not a big enough sample size for us to say like this percentage of ES chem majors go to graduate school. Because over the years, there's been 20 ES chem majors. We've only been around for 15 years. So that's why I don't give like specific percentages or numbers. They're not really super meaningful. And we don't sort of like have those posted somewhere. Maybe in, 10 more years, we'll have a better sense, but the classes are pretty small. And so a lot of our explanations are anecdotal. But thank you for that question. It's a good one.
Yeah, thank you. We have a lot of interest from students in the 3-2 engineering program. And I know my understanding of that 3-2 engineering program is typically the students kind of go into like physics, chemistry, biology route, depending on the type of uh, engineering they're looking to pursue. Is it possible for a student to also go environmental studies and then pursue the 3-2 engineering program? And have you had students do that?
Yes, and in fact, I think environmental studies represents the largest population that's done the Duke program. It still, again, the N is really low. We had a bunch of years where we didn't have any, but we have a student who would be a senior right now who is in that program, who is an environmental studies chemistry major. Typically, it's chemistry and biology within the ES program that do that. And it has these really great benefits where students get a master's degree coming out of it. They get to do 2 years at a really prestigious school that is not Reed, in addition to the prestigious school of Reed. And they get something that's a lot different, having gotten a really good core education at Reed. Reports back are that students feel very well prepared for that program when they go, which is great. It is a heavy lift to get there. Mostly, it's just a really competitive program to get into. And because you've condensed the ES major at Reed into 3 years, it creates even more rigidity than you might otherwise have, especially for chemistry, for ES chemistry. I think the ES bio students who've done it don't feel quite as restricted. And we haven't had a political science student. We had a political science student admitted a few years ago, but decided not to go. The big drawback is you don't write a Reed thesis, and the thesis is such like a capstone marquee part of the Reed experience that some students who get in decide they'd rather stay and write a thesis in their senior year than go to the Duke program.
And then this next question is maybe a little bit more specific, but what would be the best way for someone to fully specialize in specifically conservation ornithology without a pre-existing ornithology background or major?
Yeah, I mean the ES bio program or a biology major at Reed can give a lot of that. We've got in particular classes in animal behavior that complement some of the ecology classes we have. They count as environmental studies classes, and that's the route that like the most obvious route to go. We don't have like a standalone ornithology program. We're a pretty small college, so our ability to specialize is somewhat limited. But that would be the way to go there. I will say that one of the things that students find really useful if they're environmental studies majors are the opportunities to study abroad at field schools like the School for Field Studies and SEA, the Sea Education Association. that do specialize in some of the things that Reed can't really accommodate. We have really good relationships with those programs, and it's 100% possible to study abroad, particularly in the fall of your junior year. Um, we have students go to Bhutan every year with SFS. We go to Cambodia. We have students go to SEA almost every year. SEA provides that sort of like marine ecology experience that we don't really have the bandwidth to provide at Reed. SFS provides a bunch of different things depending on where folks go. And those are really good ways to, for example, if a student's particularly interested in ornithology, looking around at those programs and seeing what might best suit their interests within those study abroad programs is a way to build some of that expertise in order to establish even more kind of credibility as they apply to graduate school down the road.
Awesome. And then students that are interested in a minor, is that something that they're able to do while being an ES major?
So short answer, yes, but you can't get a minor within ES. So environmental studies has no minors. We do have environmental studies majors who get minors outside of our program. And the two that come to mind that are recent are these two environmental studies majors. One has a minor in Chinese and one is a minor in Spanish that are about to graduate. Olivia, you probably know some of the other minors that I don't know off the top of my head. But often those are the language minors are the things that we've actually kind of just realized that this is possible. We haven't had minors at Reed for very long. And when we first saw them, we were like, oh, it's going to be tough for ES students to do. And we've been proven wrong because our students do them.
I love that. That's awesome. And then how flexible is Reed when it comes to switching disciplines or taking different courses that are maybe not aligned to that current major?
Yeah, so it depends on what kind of switches you're making. There's sort of a spectrum of departments that have sequential courses versus departments that don't have sequential courses. So within math and natural sciences, you have more sequential courses. Within history and social sciences, you have fewer. Humanities departments vary quite a bit. I will tell you because I know the department with the fewest of those is history. We often are the major of last resort because none of our courses are sequential. It's not how we've structured the program. So what that means really is if you come in thinking you're going to be a chemistry major and you want to pivot toward political science or anthropology or history, that's relatively straightforward. If you come in thinking history and you don't decide until partway through your sophomore year that you really are passionate about chemistry or physics, it's a little bit heavier of a lift. And students do it all the time. It just takes some creativity and usually a semester here or there that's a little uncomfortable with the workload. Once you're in the second semester of your sophomore year, unless you're switching to history or philosophy, it's pretty hard to make those transitions. We ask students to declare their major at the end of their sophomore year. And so that's when it becomes a little bit more challenging. I don't want to sugarcoat it because it's a real thing. It's not that easy.
No, that's fair. That's very fair. And then, we were talking a little bit earlier about sort of the structure of that first year in the ES program. Do you find that that conflicts with the versatility that draws people to liberal arts colleges?
We talk a lot about this. I think it's a really good question. Students come to a liberal arts college because they want to explore a bunch of things, figure out like who they are and what they want to do, and we want to support that mission. And at the same time, we have this, and by we, I mean Reed as a college. I don't mean the environmental studies program. We have this commitment to a certain vision of rigor that requires folks to kind of get started early. So I would say across the college, we have that conversation a lot. And I would say that we resolve that tension in part through our Humanities 110 program, which is a program that enables students to engage with a bunch of different faculty members from across the humanities and a bunch of different material in a cohort so that everybody's reading the same things. And that is a pretty good exploratory course. The second way we resolve it is by emphasizing how much flexibility folks have within the requirements and outside of the requirements as they become more mature as students. In some ways, it's very attractive to a student coming into college to want to sort of try to do everything, try everything all at once. And I am very sympathetic to that. From experience, students get a lot out of the exploration that they do once they've kind of figured out what their pathway is in college and who their people are. Then they start exploring their interests in some ways with a clearer head and a better idea of what those interests are. So I see students in our program taking art and literature classes in their junior and senior year and getting way more out of them than they would have when everything else is new. So that's how we resolve it, but I don't want to suggest that like it's not attention. I think that question is really sort of well conceived because it's a thing that it's a trade we have to make.
Olivia, I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what is the culture like within the ES program from a student perspective?
Yeah. Um, it obviously changes based on your cohort, who's in your class with you at that time, but it's fun. It's really fun. Usually, at least in my experience, and I think pretty strongly across the board, you click with the people in your ES cohort pretty quickly. It's fun. And I think what really supports that is the ES department hosts a lot of these open houses. So you get to hang out with people, and the ES department has the best catering, I would say. Um, and you get to meet people from all of these other concentrations that you normally wouldn't get to meet, which is super interesting. And it makes it super fun. People are always friendly coming into these things. It's not cold or unfriendly or competitive internally. I think the ES seminars do a really good job of supporting interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work. So you get to learn about what other disciplines do, and you get to see the strengths and weaknesses of your discipline and work with other students. And I will say that from my experience in the ES department, some of my closest friends have come from these seminars. And I mean, during the junior seminar, there were a bunch of girls, and we immediately all clicked. And now we do dinner once a week all together. Uh, it's super friendly. You see everybody on campus, and it's really nice. I would not have anything bad to say about the ES department culture. Um, it's jokey, it's lighthearted. The professors get in there with you and are joking and laughing around. Um, yeah, it's fun.
Thank you so much. And this question is for the both of you. What advice would you give to students that are considering environmental studies and or considering READ as a current high schooler? What advice would you give them?
Um, don't be nervous or scared. You've got it. A lot of people switch, change their majors, come in not knowing what they want to do, are scared of the academic rigor. You will figure it out. And if that's what's you think is going to deter you, don't let it deter you from doing it. Also, join the ES department. It's really fun. Um, and you get to do things that in a department alone that's not part of the ES department, you wouldn't be able to do, especially in the social sciences.
Yeah, Olivia's kind of heard some of way too much of my advice in the past, but one of the things that I think students often think is they come to a place like Reed for the resources or the faculty or because it's prestigious. The real reason to come to a place like Reed is because of the caliber of the students that come here. Um, I think students learn far more and way better from each other than they learn from faculty members. We are facilitators. And if I have any advice to students coming in, it's to take the people that you're going to school with, wherever it is, Reed or otherwise, take them seriously as a part of your education and take yourself seriously as part of their education. Because that, to me, is what it's all about. It's what makes the good courses go. It's what makes interdisciplinary work go. It's what really learning is all about. And so, if I had one thing to say, it's like, take that seriously, that collaboration with other students. That's the thing that makes a good college experience. It's not the faculty, it's not the prestige of the school, it's none of those things. It's really the accountability that students have to each other.
Awesome. Well, that is about time. I want to thank you both, Josh and Olivia, for taking the time to talk to us and let us hear a little bit more about your perspectives about the ES program here, specifically at Reed. For the folks that attended the session, thank you all so much. You all asked phenomenal questions. We are at the 1 month countdown to the deposit deadline for my admitted students in the room. So if you do have questions or need any additional information to help you make that final choice, don't hesitate to reach out to the admissions team, your direct admissions counselor, whatever works best for you. That being said, I will let you all go and you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone.